I'm going to call this meeting to order. Meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, this Tuesday, January 14th, 2020. And as usual, we will begin with a prayer. Member Warmington, would you be so kind as to lead us in prayer? Would you do the honors, please?
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for bringing us together this day. We thank you for your many blessings and mercies throughout 2019, and we ask that you continue to bless us and lead the way in 2020. Help us to do the people's will. Be by our side. Let us work diligently for Jamaica and Jamaicans. In your blessed name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. I wish to welcome everyone here. This is our first meeting of 2020, the beginning of a new decade as well as a new year. So it is, I suppose, a significant moment. Special welcome to the members who are present. I think there are some on their way. We have an apology from Dr. Norman Dunn. Is that the only apology we have? Yeah. And special welcome to the Auditor General and her team, and Ministry of Finance officials, and of course the representatives who are here. Is this RADA? Anyone from the Ministry? From the Ministry of Agriculture and RADA. And PS, Mr. Spence. Yeah. Okay. We'll move to the minutes. We have two sets of minutes before us this morning of the meetings of November 19th and November 28th of 2019. And we'll go through them quickly just to get that out of the way. So I'll start with the minutes of the meeting of the November 19th, 2019. Page 1. Page 2, page 3. Madam Clerk, on page 3 I have two questions for you. In the fourth paragraph, which begins Dr. Grace McLean, it speaks to NET being established in 2010 as a company with responsibility for, and it says the execution in Roman 2, it says the execution of specific infrastructure projects as directed through their boards. Should that be plural or singular? Singular, thank you. And at the bottom of the page, the last paragraph, the third sentence says, she said the entity was currently in transition as a new board was being established because the first 3-year term has ended. She said the ministry would normally follow directives which would be indicated. Shouldn't that be the board? She said the board, I think the board would normally follow directives which would be indicated through the ministry to the permanent secretary for execution. Is that right? I don't. You think she said ministry? Ministry. Just read a little.
But Chairman,
well, leave it then if you think it's.
It can't be left so, because the truth is the sentence doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
If you leave it like that. The reading would suggest that it would be the minister.
The sentence doesn't make sense in its present form. Yes. On page 4, this is just a typo in the second paragraph, which is a large paragraph. The sentence should begin with a capital letter in the fifth line from the bottom. The sentence should begin with a capital letter in. Page 5.
Well, in the last line of that paragraph, the I should replace that little box there. Infrastructure were executed.
I didn't have that on my print.
That probably is the chairman's copy.
No, I just think it may be this version of Word that you have on your computer.
No, this was produced by the.
Well,
the
they
clerk.
have on their computer, because it's fine on mine. Page 5. Page 6. On page 6, in the second paragraph, towards the middle of the should be the sentence that begins, he said that the results thus far did not suggest that the model was particularly useful. It goes on to say, and having it adequately staffed to execute the works that the ministry's audit had shown need. It should be need to be done, because it's works that it refers to, yeah. And then in the following 2 sentences after that, Member Bunting said the only period when he had seen projects executed rapidly from start to finish was when. The word when should be inserted there. Mr. Porma. And the very last sentence of that paragraph, he questioned whether the NET could do that sort of major project management. It's difficult to, is the reference to NET correct? Because the previous, what has been said previously, he was kind of extolling.
Well, he said it was when it was there that it was done.
Yes.
But it's not there anymore, so they're questioning whether they would still be able to do that.
So I mean no. Well, can we say could still do? We'll insert the word still to make sense of it. Yeah. All right. In the following paragraph, the Mount St. Joseph High School. Is it the Mount St. Joseph Catholic High School or Mount St. Joseph High School? Because there are 2 different references to it. It's Catholic.
Same
Huh?
thing. It's the same thing.
No, it's treated as in the name of the school. I'm saying is
It's Catholic.
it's Catholic. So let's fix it in the first reference. Page 7. Page 8. On page 8, in the first paragraph, the very last sentence reads: the procurement for these shovel-ready projects were done, should really be was done, using the competitive bidding process, and they could be readily executed. And it goes on to say, should a project that the ministry was currently undertaking fall through.
Right.
This was in the context of the 3-year planning period and so on. Why would it be should a project fall through?
Currently undertaking, so they had these projects that were shovel ready waiting.
Right.
One of them that they are currently doing should fall through, then they could pull from those shovel ready ones.
I see. I thought they were moving to a system where they would be using these would be the projects that they would be implementing, not only as a kind of substitute for something that was already in the pipeline. Anyway, page 9, page 10, page 11. In the first paragraph at the top of page 11, sentence reads, she said the ministry accepted that the approvals from the municipal corporations and other entities were very important, and has therefore established the required relationships and was taking steps to ensure that this would not be the way forward. Isn't it that this would be the way forward? In other words, getting municipal corporation approval would be the way they would do it going forward. Yes, I think you should remove the word not. All right. With those amendments, could someone move for the adoption of the minutes, please? Moved by Dr. Guy.
I want to go back to the last correction you sought to make. I think it is correct to leave the not in. Because currently basically they didn't have a relationship with the municipal corporation. So she has indicated that accepted that the approvals from the minister was very important and therefore established a required relationship and taking steps to ensure that what happened before would not.
Well, that's the problem. You see, when you use the word this, the question is what is it referring to? And if the sentence in which it arises states that approvals from municipal corporations and other entities are very important, so the word this subsequently seems to refer to that, not to what was referred to in a previous sentence about the lack of getting those approvals.
I defer to your
so I mean, if you feel that it's ambiguous, and it probably is, why don't we, instead of using the word this, they would say that getting the required approvals would be the way forward.
Right.
Yeah. Would you move for the adoption now? So, great. Seconded by Member Jackson. Thank you. We'll move to the minutes of the 28th of November last year. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. On page 5, in the version I have, the second paragraph has a telephone number, it looks like, inserted in the text. That should be deleted. Yeah. Page 6, page 7. In the middle paragraph, which is a long paragraph, about 2/3 the way through it, there's a discussion where it says, she said that because of the challenges experienced with space in the schools, a child who has not mastered grade 4 could not be held back in that grade, resulting in a situation where these students might move up to grade 6, although operating at a grade 4 level. And then the sentence goes on. She added that although they would have mastered at grade 6, they would have missed out on the grades 4 and 5 levels. Is the word mastered there correct?
That's what she said. I was questioning it myself, but that's what was said. I don't know how to put it steady.
I think it should just say completed.
Okay.
And take out this instead of master that, just say because you can't master grade 6 if you haven't been able to complete 4 and 5. So let's say have completed grade 6. Page 8. Page 9. There's a typo on page 9 on the issue 4. The line, it's a sentence about halfway through where it says Dr. McLean said the ministry would be happy. The S was left off. It says aid. Page 10, page 11. Any other corrections? If not, would somebody please move for the adoption of the minutes of the meeting of November 28th, 2019? Moved by Member Bunting, seconded by Member Phillips. Thank you. Okay, matters arising from the minutes. Members, we have one of the items was the language education policy, which came up in the discussion towards the end of the last meeting we had. And that has been produced for us and has been, I think, tabled today for those who may want to read it. I noticed that it's dated December 2019, which is after the meeting. So I'm not sure. The cover letter still says that the policy is in draft, as the approval process is not yet completed, and that this is scheduled to be undertaken at the start of the new calendar year. But for those who are interested, it has been provided. Any other matters arising?
No, but it's just that I haven't provided for everybody because I sent it my email.
Oh, the clerk says that she hasn't produced a printed copy for everybody. She's also printed 3 copies because it has been emailed. Yeah, so unless you intend to read it, of the language education policy, yeah. Okay, members, so we'll move now to the matter at hand today, which is a review of the Auditor General Department's performance audit report on RADA's management of the rehabilitation of farm roads. And we welcome again the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Derman Spence, and perhaps you could introduce your team, Mr. Spence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. Good morning again. To my right is Mr. Nigel Myrie, Chairman of the Board of Management for RADA. Son? One.
Let them sort out the mic.
Check. This is now. It's gonna be all over the place. Let me just. Perhaps I should just hold it a bit. Thanks again, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and members of the PAC committee. Appearing with me this morning to bring clarity to the farm road rehabilitation program under RADA is Mr. Nigel Myrie, he's the chairman of the Board of Governors, to my right, and to my left is Mr. Peter Thompson, the CEO of RADA. And the other team members in the front here is Mr. Pendergrass, sitting right here, who is the senior works engineer. And Mr. Gaynor is the accountant in RADA, Director of Finance. And behind Mr. Gaynor is Miss Michelle Parkins. She's our Senior Director for Policy Economic Planning. And to her left is Mr. Delroy Coley, our Director for Strategic Planning.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
may I ask a question for clarification? Normally, when we invite agency department to the PAC, normally accounting officers and the technical staff, what assistance can the chairman gives that the CEO and the PS cannot give? It's unusual. Normally, it's the CEO, the head of the agency, and the ministry, the permanent secretary. The board member, I don't recall board member Noel being a part of the team, because and it's requested, because any assistance that the chairman can give, I believe the CEO should be far more qualified and capable of giving that report. That assistance. That's my observation.
Right. Well, they're both here, as I understand it. So, yes. Well, we won't, we welcome him, and if he has anything to add, I'm sure he will. I understand your point. Anyway, Madam AG, perhaps you could just give us an overview of the report that we could then use as a way. We have already.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. The performance audit was undertaken to determine whether RADA 1 had an effective and efficient management system for the rehabilitation of farm roads in Jamaica. 2, had a clear policy and established management framework, and whether there was an effective system to assure quality. The assessment covered the period 2014-2015 to 2018-19 and revealed a number of weaknesses, such as the lack of cohesiveness in the budgetary process. We noted that the budget submissions and plans did not include funding for routine preventative and emergency repairs to provide an acceptable physical road infrastructure. Further, despite the requirement of RADA's policy that roads selected for rehabilitation must satisfy established criteria, RADA could not explain the basis for the selection of some farm roads. And of course, the criteria is set out on page 10 of 45 of the report, and I'll just go through. 1 is increased accessibility, especially during the rainy season. The second is cause an increase in production. And the 4th is have a positive economic impact on the parish and its farmers.
Just to point out that in your report also on page 35, in Appendix 4, there's a more, slightly more extensive listing of the criteria, yes, in 6 bullet points.
Right. RADA also lacked a proper roads management system to support its road rehabilitation program. And there was a lack of conformity with the procurement guidelines. And I'll just cite one example. In the case of emergency contracts, we noted that 25 contracts were awarded using the emergency method for circumstances which did not meet the guidelines definition of emergency. And of course, this was exacerbated by the frequent rescoping of works to omit what we consider to be important infrastructure items such as drains and culverts, and changed location of contracted works without any evidence of remeasurement. Mr. Chairman, you would have been provided, as well as the members, with the prompt which sets out the findings in greater detail. That's just an overview. But before I end, I just want to share with you the 4 recommendations proffered. 1 is RADA's need to align its strategic plan to embrace routine, preventative, and emergency repairs. The second is that RADA should consider implementing a road inventory management system for roads under its purview. The third is RADA should review its current systems to ensure adherence to quality standards and guidelines related to its roadworks. And the fourth was consideration of coordination with PIOJ and statin to enable the measurement of the economic impact of road rehabilitation. And that is juxtaposed against one of the criteria, which states that it must provide some economic benefit. And it rather then would need to be in a position to actually assess and determine.
Before we go further, Chairman, I want to ask a question here.
Go ahead, member.
This report that was tabled in Parliament, the performance audit of RADA management. What I'd like to know, if before this, the draft, was it ever sent to RADA for their comments before it was put in its final state and tabled in Parliament?
That's the normal practice, Auditor General.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but the representatives from RADA should be able to speak to that. It's a standard practice.
No, I asked a question. I asked a question because I don't have the answer. They can speak to it, yes. But I asked a question, but they are not the person to answer. They didn't lay this report in Parliament. So I asked a question and expect the answer from whoever lays this in Parliament or whatever department or agency. If you allow me to complete, then you'll understand. All right. If the draft was sent to RADA, respective agencies, and we have the responses now before us in this form of a prompt here, and what have you. What I want to know from RADA, when the drafts were sent to you, did you respond in fully to the concerns? Did you respond fully to those concerns before this was done?
Yes, we have responded.
And obviously, so tell me, were they taken consideration in your view before this was filed? Were they taken consideration in the in compiling this report to Parliament?
Well, when we submitted the responses to the draft,
yes,
we did not get back
a response. So when you read this, were the concerns that came to you, were they included in this? What came to you then for you to respond? Is this report included the concerns that you had? Or your responses to the concern?
Not all, member.
They weren't?
Not all.
So this came to us just as it was sent to you then?
No, he said not all.
Well, but part of this then, it came to the House ignoring your responses to the questions asked.
Mr. Warmington.
And whereby, no. Look, hear me. If RADA responded to the draft, responding correct in the best of their view or their knowledge and understanding, they responded to the draft and their concern. Yet, what is saying that not all of these capture their concern. It means that this was written ignoring entirely or the entire response from RADA.
Not entirely. He said not all.
Right, so I say part of it has been ignored then.
Perhaps.
Why has this happened? And why ask the question?
Yes.
This is not the first that I've seen this and hear complaint from different agencies that appear before this committee, that their concerns were never taken into consideration when the Auditor General writing the report. So my question, are these reports being written for sensational purposes or to capture public knowledge or to what have you? Or is it to get to the bottom of what is there and give us a correct report of the situation out there?
Mr. Chairman.
That's what I'd like to know.
Member Bunting.
Mr. Chairman, if Mr. Warmington had taken the time to read the report, the paragraph at the bottom of page 9 would have explained the approach. After completion of the audit meeting, an exit meeting was held with RADA to discuss the audit findings. Responses received from RADA have been considered while preparing this report and have been included where relevant. Now, the only person's judgment as to what is relevant or not relevant to be included in the report is the Auditor General, not Member Warmington. It's her report. And I wish he would stop badgering the public servants who have been doing an outstanding job exposing the corruption of the administration. And instead of coming here to let us learn from the reports and see how we can improve the system, this approach of badgering public servants continues.
This is not where you should do your campaign, young man. This is not the place for your campaign.
Yeah.
This is not the place for your campaign, I can tell you.
Anyway, Member Warmington, it is the Auditor General's report, and the report specifically addresses the point you've raised. And it is quite common.
You have forgotten how you badgered the Petrojam here. You talk about badgering?
Stop
what you did to the Petrojam staff here?
Please, let's have some order. Member Warmington and others, please, let's have some order. You've raised an issue. The report itself addresses the point you've raised, and I'm going to allow the Auditor General to speak to it herself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to look at this response to see who signed it. And I'm just asking for specific dates as to when RADA received the second draft. So I have a response dated July 12th, 2019, signed by the Chief Executive Officer, Peter Thompson, and that's you, Mr. Thompson. And this was your response to the first draft. Yes, Mr. Thompson? Do you recall receiving a first draft?
I'm not sure which draft I responded to.
Yes.
But I know I have responded, but I haven't gotten back any response.
Okay. Well, I have two responses. Your response to the first draft and your response to the second draft, taking into consideration the response that you provided, which is 2 pages long, to the first draft. Yes. So the first draft would have taken into consideration whatever evidence you would have provided along with your first draft. Do you recall that, Mr. Thompson?
No.
You don't recall receiving any of the drafts that you responded to?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Well, Mr. Chairman, the CEO responded. I don't know what he has a copy of, but I know what he responded to. And he responded to both drafts. It's not unusual for an entity to receive up to 3 drafts before a report is finalized. As you will well understand, in my position, I will have to make a final determination based on evidence that is provided. So whereas you may provide an explanation, if the evidence is not provided, then I cannot accept it. However, Mr. Chairman, in addition to responding to Mr. Thompson on 2 occasions pertaining to the drafts and his response is included in the annual report, in the report. So if you look on page 10 of 45, I've stated here, RADA indicated that going forward, the strategic plans would include a budget line item for maintenance of farm roads. I've also included that RADA advised that the lack of financial and human resources hampered the implementation of this activity, but that in the interim, sensitization sessions were initiated during its quarterly performance review meetings in order to give senior management an appreciation of the importance of the impact evaluation. And the responses included all throughout report in the report that was sent to the Speaker of the House, who tabled the report.
Thank you, Auditor General. I think that's an adequate response. I don't think we can profit at all from going down this line any further. And I think we should move straight to the prompts so we can address the issues arising from the report. We have before us the briefing report prepared by the Auditor General's Department for our use today.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If you would just allow me to add something for clarification.
Go ahead, please.
The prompts, the response included in the prompts is not the response provided to the report. It's the response that is provided to the clerk when the members are invited to attend upon the Public Accounts Committee. So the RADA would have provided additional information and steps and initiatives that will be taken. And having done so, the audit team will seek to verify those additional responses. And the prompts would indicate whether that response is accepted or whether we will keep it in view.
So just for clarification, the process is you do your audit, you produce a draft report, you share it with the agency, you get their comments, you take those into account, you produce a revised draft, which you share with them again. They're able to comment on it, and again, and in this instance they did. You thereafter finalized your report, which in this case takes into account things that you heard in that iterative process from them. Then now it's tabled in Parliament. The clerk would seek their responses in anticipation of this meeting when the report is going to be considered by the PAC. And their responses to that are then included in the management response section of each issue raised in the prompt. And your department then seeks to verify whether or not that response settles the issue or not. And if it settles it, you indicate that this is now settled. Otherwise, it's kept in view or require further action or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. It seems a very sound process.
That's standard. And Mr. Chairman, even during the course of some of these examinations of reports, the prompts change as we go along, because as new information comes forward or new initiatives, corrective actions are taken, sometimes we have prompts updated 2 or 3 times during the course of our examination of the findings. And if you look at the dates, the things that management's response is speaking to things which they either have done or plan to do subsequent to the date of the report. So it obviously is, it's an ongoing remedial action, or we're looking in terms of the management response at an ongoing remedial action, attempting to address the findings of the report, not contesting the findings of the report as they were as at the date of the report.
Very well. We will move to issue 1 in the prompt. Issue 1 reads as follows. RADA's budget request for the management of farm roads was limited to the execution of road rehabilitation projects under the Farm Road Rehabilitation Program, the FRRP. RADA has responsibility for farm roads estimated to be at least 10% of Jamaica's entire road network, as well as for overseeing the maintenance and development of these roads. RADA's annual funding requests were limited to the rehabilitation of 50 kilometers of priority roads under the Farm Road Rehabilitation Program, FRRP. However, RADA's budget submissions and plans did not include funding for routine, preventative, and emergency repairs to provide an acceptable physical road infrastructure. The alignment of the budget to the strategic business plan varied from year to year. There was no consistent relationship between RADA's budget outlined in this strategic business plan and that requested from the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, MICAF. RADA did not provide reasons for the difference, which not only limited the transparency of the budget process, but without credible information, it may be difficult to hold to account those involved in managing farm road projects. Further, RADA failed to produce evidence that the ministry approved the diversion of funds allocated to farm roads towards the repair of non-farm roads. management's response. We accept the Auditor General's finding and corrective steps have been taken going forward. From 2020-2021 financial year, the cost of farm road maintenance, preventive maintenance, has been included in RADA's strategic plan as part of a total farm road rehabilitation program budget. The strategic business plan and budget are aligned for the 2020 to 2021 period. So, yes, Mr. Jackson.
I would like to get the benefit. RADA accepts what the AG says about the non-alignment. And in my view, it seems like an arbitrary set of actions in terms of how the roads are determined. You have a plan, a program, and you carry out activities notwithstanding that. What informed that practice? You admitted that, yes, this variance exists. Why have you been doing that?
Well, we align the 2020-21.
No, I'm not talking the 2020. I'm talking the one for which the priority one. Prior to, you have indicated in the thing that you'll do it for the 2021 period, but prior to then it did not. It is that I'm asking about.
Well, apparently the strategic business plan was not updated at the time of this report.
So what informed your decisions then?
Well, the Auditor General team would have done its audit and picked.
No, you are the one executing. What informed the decisions that you were taking then? The Auditor General really record what you had done.
Yes.
And I want to appreciate what informed that action then.
Well, we thought it important as an overall strategy to include, it's a major expenditure, and we thought that it should be incorporated in the overall strategic plan of RADA. So it's out of discussion with my management team, we ensure that this is done.
No, but what this says is completely
I think, why would your budget submissions to the ministry not include funding for routine, preventative, and emergency repairs to the farm road network? Why would the budget request not include that?
Originally, it was not a requirement for us to do maintenance. It was just to do rehabilitation. So subsequently to the report, that was done.
There was a time when you weren't responsible for road maintenance for farm roads. No. Is that what you're saying? You weren't responsible to do the repairs and maintenance of the farm road, only rehabilitation?
Just rehabilitation.
And rehabilitation, for those of us who are not experts, the difference between rehabilitation of farm roads and repairs and maintenance is what? What's the difference between those two concepts?
Well, maintenance is just more like an upkeep, continuous upkeep of the road to ensure that it is accessible by vehicular traffic to farmers. And that would include like bushing, patching, and clean drains, etc.
Mm-hmm. And rehabilitation, it's a more extensive form of work.
Yes, more extensive.
So when did you assume responsibility, not just for rehabilitation of the farm roads, but actually for their upkeep and maintenance?
Since the report.
Since the report?
Yes. As I said earlier, it was not a requirement that we do maintenance.
So who was responsible for the maintenance before?
Well, the farmers, in their own little way, usually, keep the road accessible by cleaning and, dumping stuff in potholes.
Move to issue 2. RADA could not readily distinguish between farm roads and parochial roads managed by municipal corporations. Given that the farm road rehabilitation program is extended to surrounding communities comprising parochial roads, we expected that RADA would have established criteria to distinguish farm roads from parochial roads to prevent overlap with the municipal corporations. RADA established annual priority lists for the selection of farm roads to be rehabilitated, but could not explain the basis for the selection of some farm roads. Whereas RADA's policy required that road selection for rehabilitation must satisfy the criteria, and we've already looked at what those are: increased accessibility, especially during the rainy season, causing an increase in production, and having a positive economic impact on the parish and its farmers. So those were the criteria, but it wasn't, the priority list didn't seem to result from an application of the criteria. RADA admitted that its definition of farm roads was inadequate and outdated. Management's response: the definition of a farm road at present is not comprehensive, and steps are being taken to develop a broader definition to include roads leading to and from agro-processing and marketing facilities. A revised definition is being proposed to the policymakers for consideration by the end of December 2019. In instances where RADA is required to repair parochial roads, a memorandum of understanding will be developed to effect maintenance of same with immediate effect. At present, cost sharing was not considered an option, or was not a considered option. However, for the upcoming period, financial year 2020-2021, and going forward, attempts will be made to engage the relevant agencies. A scoring system is being developed for prioritizing the list of farm roads, which is constantly being updated. This scoring system is anticipated to be in effect by March 31, 2020. So, Mr. Thompson, in terms of how the priority lists were compiled, the Auditor General has said here that the lists, well, essentially RADA couldn't explain the basis for the selection of some of the farm roads that made it onto the priority list. You've indicated there are two different issues here. There's a question of how the priority list was compiled, and whether or not the criteria that was to guide that process was followed. And secondly, the question of distinguishing between farm roads and parochial roads, which fall under the responsibility of the municipal corporations. And in your response, you've indicated your intention to, first of all, in your policy going forward, to have a better definition of what a farm road is. Secondly, to the extent that there's an overlap with parochial roads, there will be an MOU signed with the municipal corporation to guide, I guess, who does what and who's responsible for what. And thirdly, you mentioned the scoring system for prioritizing the farm list roads, the roads on the farm list, the farm roads on the list rather, which you hope will be ready, that scoring system, by the end of March this year. So in terms of the selection for the priority list, how was that done?
Chairman, can I say something here before he answers?
Yes, sir.
What I want to know, if there's a different method used in different parishes in selecting the roads, farm roads or roads to be repaired, or when they mentioned that you do work sometimes on parochial road. What I know in St. Catherine, the list that you work from, my understanding, is normally prepared by the parish manager from the team in the parish. Is that so?
Yes.
And you are guided by that? Because your office don't, not in the field. So my understanding in St. Catherine is that the parish office prepares the list of roads that serve farmers. And where, for example, a part of a parochial road is included because of the condition of the parochial road to reach the farm road, it makes no sense, because I've had that experience in Southwest St. Catherine. It makes no sense to rehabilitate the farm road and not include the section of the parochial road that the farmer has to use to get to the farm road. And the basis that I was told in St. Catherine, that they include a part of the parochial road so as to access the farm road, and they, in their field work, put together list of farm roads parochial roads that will be affected and then supplied, passed on to the head office. Is this the way it's done in other parishes?
Yes.
So your question is similar to mine, but more specific. So you've mentioned that it's done at the parish level through the RADA structure. Yeah. So what is the methodology employed in selecting the roads that make it onto the list, the priority list for the year's road activity, repair activity or rehab activity?
I'll just add for clarity, Mr. Chairman, that the statement that RADA could not distinguish between farm roads under its jurisdiction and parochial roads managed by any municipal corporation it's a little bit beyond how we view it. We are able to distinguish between the roads, and the criteria used for selecting farm roads has to do with a range of things such as the production levels in the area, the amount of farmers to be affected, kind of impact that it will have on production and these kinds of things. And the condition, most importantly, the evaluation of the condition of the roads. The process mentioned earlier on in terms of from the parish level up, in terms of identification right up to the board through the CEO for approval is consistent across the entire island for the program. And so it's a standardized process. The matter of the parochial roads that get intertwined for some attention along with the farm roads is consistent with what we have noticed as a change in pattern in the distribution of farming activities and production areas. New and different areas are opening up, and the farms and the activities are coming closer to some of what we consider to be the parochial roads. And so that is why, arising from the report, the board is now to consider and make a proposal towards a definition, a more broadened definition, taking into consideration the current dynamics and the changing environment in which we operate. And it has come up many times even before the auditors came in, Mr. Chairman, and is something that we raised at the PAAC, and the policymakers there and then had supported our position in terms of having a review, a national review of the definition, and that's what we were moving forward to, because that is even prior to the Auditor General's intervention.
So is there a definitive list in each parish of the parochial roads for that parish? Is there a definitive list of the parochial roads that are the responsibility of the municipal corporation? Is there a listing or a map that shows definitively whether a particular road is a parochial road or not?
There is a comprehensive road list, but we are going to, based on the attendant outcome of the audit, to deal with farm roads that attend to our farms, a nexus with parochial road that we have to deal with.
So just going back to the question that was asked, how was the prioritization done for the selection of roads that made it to the priority list?
Well, I indicated, Mr. Chairman, that the process begins at the parish level.
The RADA structure.
Yes, RADA. And it's based on the condition of the road in terms of the level of deterioration. It's based on the demographics in which, attends to the road, the number of farmers, the productivity that's taking place in the area, the acres under production, the perceived and expected improvement in the agricultural production activity that will result.
P.S., you're answering the question, but I was really directing it to Mr. Thompson, because the Auditor General's finding is that the criteria there was no evidence that the criteria were being applied. And the criteria you're referring to, the criteria you outlined just now, are broadly similar to what the criteria are as written in the report. So, but there's the report. One of the criticisms in the report related to how the priority list appeared to be compiled without clear reference to the the criteria that were in the policy?
Well, we have an established criteria as to how we select road at the parish level. I might not be in agreement to some extent with what the Auditor General said, because we, in terms of getting the priority listing, we take certain things into consideration, as the PS had mentioned. The number of farmers the road serve, the areas under production, cultivation, and the perceived production having restored these roads, the likely outcome in terms of additional production and so forth. So these are established criteria that we have in our records to show that this is how we come up with the priority listing, in addition to the state and conditions of the road at the time it was surfaced for rehabilitation.
Madam Auditor General, I mean, what we're being told is essentially that the criteria were applied. But the report suggests otherwise. Perhaps you could just shed some light on what you actually found.
Mr. Chairman, I have both responses in front of me. I've been trying to reconcile what the permanent secretary has said with what is here in front of me. I see nothing of the sort in front of me here. I am also searching for RADA's response to the matter of the evidence provided that the roads selected met the criteria, and I'm not seeing any specific response to it. I'm asking that we bring up the draft report, and in fact I will look at both reports here. But Mr. Chairman, this is it. There is a difference between what is said and what you provide evidence for. So whereas it is easy to provide representation verbally about a system that exists or should exist, as an auditor, I cannot act on verbal representation. I have to be provided with evidence. Because once I accept information from the auditee, I am in essence suggesting that this system is in place. If it is called into question, as the auditor who have verified it, I must have the information to present to the Parliament, to you, Mr. Chairman, to satisfy you that I am satisfied that it exists. So it is not sufficient to say what practice should be in place. The information must be presented. I have both responses here. You probably could ask RADA, the representatives, to provide you with the responses that were submitted in support of the draft that were provided. But I'm sure I heard Mr. Thompson said just now that he did not agree with a comment, but I am not seeing that here either, that there was any disagreement with the audit findings. And there is a reason why we provide the entities with the draft reports, and even when they are updated, we provide them with the update before it is tabled, because they are given an additional opportunity to say that we disagree and why we disagree. At the end of the day, as I stated earlier, the responsibility becomes mine as to whether I accept what is the response, or do I act on my judgment and maintain a deficiency based on what we have identified.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Yes, please.
May I? Maybe the response is not as clear as we would have liked. And so, even responding to audit queries need to be strengthened. From a policy perspective, and it is very clear, RADA can provide the evidence of the policy position as to the basis on which the roads for repairs are selected. Sometimes I believe that there is a kind of confusion between, criteria and definition. So, for example, it is clear that attendant to the selection of the road, the acreage to be impacted, farming acres is taken into consideration, the number of farmers, the general economic activity as it attends to agriculture production. And so I know that that is done and that is presented in support of prioritizing the roads to be repaired. So maybe we need to strengthen the response, but I'm not certain when I look at the responses here that, because what I'm actually saying is not properly presented in the report, and I suspect that's what the Auditor General
I would have thought,
saying.
Since you have to prioritize across, no doubt, many areas of need in terms of farm road rehabilitation, I'd have thought you'd have developed a matrix which would set out the criteria and set out the choices that you're making and a justification for them against that criteria, which would be documented. So when it's audited, this is what you present, showing that you actually applied the criteria in making the decision. It doesn't appear that that existed or anything of that type.
It exists.
Mr. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
You want to go ahead?
Mr.
Yes, PS, you say it exists.
Yes, what you have mentioned, dear Chairman, have exist. That is what we are guided by, and even the current set of roads that we are doing now is the criteria that we use.
So if it exists, Mr. Thompson, was it not shared with the auditors when the audit was being done?
Well, it's something that we probably have to look at. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam AG?
Yes, let me provide you with an example, and I think one that is quite relevant to what the PS mentioned. And this is page 21 of the report, paragraph 2.8. Subsequent to our audit, RADA indicated that they intend to develop a system whereby roads would be identified by location, distance, condition of surface, drainage, estimates of works to be done, number of farmers served, agricultural production in the area, types of enterprise, hectareage in use and output, and expected impact of the rehabilitation investment among other demographics. However, RADA did not provide a time frame in which this new process would be implemented. As you will see there in that section, it is in italics, which means that it is quoting RADA.
Mr. Thompson,
Yeah.
this suggests that this is something you intend to do, but have not yet
well,
actually implemented, at least as at the date that you submitted the response.
well, it's just we had it not so much in so much details. After the audited report, then we expand the list to take in some of what the Auditor General just mentioned.
Mr. Chairman, I'm having a little difficulty here.
Mr. Jass.
On the one hand, Mr. Thompson says it is in place. And yet the documentation, he said before, they intend to do it. That both can't be true at the same time.
What I'm saying, member, is that the process was there. It wasn't extensive as what the audit. So subsequently, we have expanded the list to include the matrix that you spoke of, to include more demographics and other things to determine.
And this is applied at the parish level, or you do this centrally?
It applies at the parish level, and it fed all the way up.
So what you had in place before, which you said was, went some distance towards what is being proposed as a better practice, but wasn't all the way yet.
Yes.
Was that a written process? Was
Yes.
It was a written,
Yes.
it was a documented
Yes.
process.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I can tell you, that response is totally unsatisfactory because it's inconsistent. And Mr. Chairman of the board is here, who have invited himself to come. He would have been presiding over this too. Was that practice satisfactory?
I don't know, were the criteria for selection
Yes.
of farm roads, was that dealt with at the level of the board, or was that dealt with at management level? The selection of the priority list.
You would like to hear from the chairman, Mr.
If he wants to weigh in it, and he can explain to what extent the board satisfied itself that the criteria were being applied in selecting the roads for the priority list.
Okay, so
Adhere to.
the board, in making a decision, require information to inform an approval. The roads require attendant to them in the presentation from the management, demographic information in respect of the number of farmers, production from the previous years, the types of crops produced, the animal husbandry that's taking place, types of animals, whether it's cattle, goat, etc., number of farmers. It looks at the condition of the road, right? It also requires indication whether it's a parochial road or a farm road, right? And other information that comes to the board. On the basis of that prioritization that comes from the farm and the budget that we have, a decision is made in selecting a number of the roads that are brought forward to go to repairs.
So it's the board that makes the final selection?
The final selection. The recommendations come from the parishes with a prioritization, and then the board makes a final, because we have a finite budget, and that finite budget has to be shared right across the country.
And this is a practice that has been in place since you were on the board?
This is a procedure that I've engaged in since I've been on the board, yes.
It's just very peculiar that it doesn't accord with what the Auditor General's report found, because it suggests, from what you're saying, it suggests that there was a robust system of selecting the roads by reference to the criteria that is in the policy. But then the Auditor General's findings said there was a lack of evidence that the criteria were being applied in all cases.
We keep...
Yes, Member Finn.
If I may, through you, Chair, I mean, what I'm hearing, yes, I heard what the Auditor General said, but I can say possibly yes, that the criteria was in place, because West Rural St. Andrew, I know that I've been turned down because they said it was not a farm road, but a parochial road, and gave me the criteria. And this was not just now, this was a couple years back, to say I did not fit, or that particular road did not fit the criteria, and was told what the criteria was. So I'm not sure if it was just not written or what, but I know personally, living in a rural constituency, that I was affected by the criteria of what a farm road is.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask one question here?
1 second, Mr. I'll soon come to you. It's not so much the issue of whether it's a farm road or not that we're discussing now. It was more the question of what the criteria applied by the RADA decision makers in selecting which farm roads would be fixed or rehabilitated in a given period of time. And you're saying you felt the application of that criteria in your constituency. Mr. Wilmington.
The chairman said that this is the protocol that happens through his tenure. Do you understand? How long have you been there?
Well, I've been on the board since 2016.
No, but how long have you been chairman?
I've been chairman since February of 2019.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. The report was done within that, I guess, just about then, before you start to institute your method. Okay? So it can't be said that it's in conflict with what is here, because you have instituted that as chairman. That's what you're saying.
He didn't specify whether this was something that only arose since he became chairman. I asked him, since he's been on the board, is that the procedure that has been followed? And he indicated, yes, it is.
Yes, but since I've become chairman, I've strengthened that process and the requirement for that data to be collected, and for the development, as the Auditor General required, of database system attendant to the farm roads.
Members, I think we can move on to the next issue. You want to say something? Yes, go ahead.
I have Mr. Prendergast here, and I know, he knows that I was turned down through the parish because of a particular road, Paradise Road. And I have over 20 farmers. It was stated that I did not fit the criteria. That road did not fit the criteria, and this was not last year, I think there was a year before, that I actually had put in this because of the different farmers that were on that road. I just wanted to make that statement.
So you've made your point that it was applied and you felt it, but what is peculiar though is that when the audit was done, there wasn't documentary material provided to the Auditor General's department to show that the criteria was being methodically employed in the decision-making process. And without it, it appears it can be an arbitrary process. It can be a process which is taking into account other issues. Yeah, so this is why it's an important matter and why I've spent some time on it.
And why, in closing on that point, Mr. Chairman, what is clear is that the pronouncements from RADA does not have any corresponding evidence by the Auditor General's examination to support the verbal presentations that we have heard. That is the conclusion that I can come away with.
Well,
she said she saw no evidence to support it.
The point is that we haven't really had a satisfactory explanation as to why the Auditor General's findings that there was a lack of evidence of the application of the criteria in every case. Why that evidence was not provided? Because RADA is saying they have that process, and they do apply it, and it is documented. So we're left with is a lacuna, a gap, and that gap is why, if that's the case, was that not provided to the Auditor General, or if it was, clearly it was unsatisfactory. Yeah. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear you speak about the gap, and yes, obviously there is a gap. But I too am a living testimony to the fact that the criteria is in place, or it is being used anyway, because I have a road, cottage in Salt Spring, Flower Hill cottage, that area is basically Bami. I mean cassava farmer, because we have the Bami factory up there. And Mr. Pendergrass knows very well, that is only one road in Flower Hill that has been done under this program. Yet cottage, which plants vastly cassava for the same factory in Flower Hill, they are unable to get their road, and every time I put it on the program, I am told that it is not in it because of the criteria. So I do understand what Madam Auditor General is saying, but at the same time, I can sit here and testify that that system is in place.
As your colleague to your right did already. So point
Chairman,
yes, Dr.
Not to seem to be exhausting the discussion here now. Chairman, you indicated that that was what came before the board. You are satisfied that the various criteria were met and hence the approval was given.
That's correct.
You might not be able to answer this, but I'm asking against the background of a pronouncement by the Honorable Minister without portfolio, who indicated that going forward, the situation would that the parish advisory boards would be the ones who will make the selection as it relates to the roads to be rehabilitated, which suggests to me that he feels that the system at that central board level is not working.
No,
he said,
no, it's an additional level of oversight in the process of the selection. So when the parish management would have completed the list, the parish advisory boards are to review that list to ensure that the criteria is being applied and the roads that are there are to be there. When that is signed off on by the parish advisory boards, it then is sent on to the management at head office for submission
the parish
to the
advisory boards.
Okay, thank you.
Who appoints the parish advisory boards?
The minister.
The minister. And this parish advisory board is in what do they advise on?
As it were, the local boards for RADA in each of the parishes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So previously the advisory boards that RADA had established in the parishes, they weren't directly involved in this process, but you're saying they will now become directly
integral
involved.
to the process to provide that additional oversight.
But
yeah, Mr. Camp.
Chairman, You've said that there's been a shift in the agricultural patterns, so that there are new acreages which are coming under consideration. Until you then decide the new roads, how if I were to submit one tomorrow morning, which falls under this new to the parish board, how would they go about deciding whether or not that one would get consideration? Because you have not yet developed this new framework.
How it connects to the existing farm roads and the level of farming activity, and the board would have to make a judgment call on it based on the recommendations.
Right. So an assessment would have to be done by both the parish team and the engineering team to assess the road to determine whether it fits into the criteria. When that process is completed, if it qualifies, then a decision can be made to recommend that road at the parish level to the national board through the management at the head office for consideration for repairs. All right. There's a little thing about the roads. There's a classification of roads, all right, a classification of farm roads and a classification called parochial roads, right? What's happening over time is that parochial roads are now serving farming communities, and that overlap is creating a new situation and scenario for us in selecting roads to repair, to serve farmers. So we're finding that more often a parochial road is becoming, quote unquote, a farm road in an expanded consideration. And that's why we're seeking to have a new definition that will encompass. We can't reclassify the road, farm road or parochial road. That has to be a legislative process. But we can put policy in place to attend to roads which are serving the needs of farmers.
Mr. Monte, you're on to say something.
In listening to all the different selection criteria, I didn't hear mention from any of the officials anyway the role of the elected representative in identifying or recommending these roads. Although my colleagues, they spoke to their experience, their frustration of recommending roads, but somewhere in the formal process, is there a role for the elected representatives for these communities?
Well, requests coming from various sources. Right? So it comes from farming groups, it comes from anybody in the community, it comes from the members of parliament. So they go once the request comes in, it goes through the same process. Right? So you may write to the CEO about a road, but he then dispatch that to the respective parish, and they put it through the process. What is required when we have approved the road program is that validation. It then goes back to the parishes, and the parishes are required through the parish management to consult with and to inform the local representatives in the parishes.
Is there a danger in including the advisory boards in the selection process? Is there a danger of politicizing the selection at the parish level before it reaches the RADA management on board?
It's not the selection, it's in reviewing the application of the criteria to ensure that the roads that are there meet the criteria and the recommendations therefore are valid.
That's what it should be.
It's a validation process.
That's what it should be, but does it provide an opportunity for persons to bring other considerations to bear on the decision as to which roads should be selected?
Well, so far it's not been the experience.
Issue 3. RADA lacked a proper road management system to support its road rehabilitation program. Consistent with its mandate, we expected RADA to have a robust road inventory management system with a detailed master list of farm roads identified by location, condition, and works undertaken. Information necessary for the proper determination and prioritization of resources. Such a system would also provide RADA with the current status of farm roads to guide rehabilitation activities. Against this background, RADA, which continually revised its budget for farm road rehabilitation, failed to document reasons for revisions and often excluded or scoped out critical elements such as drainage after the commencement of contracts in order to stay within budget. The response from management. We accept the observations. A contracts register has been developed and it's a contracts register, has been developed and will be maintained with immediate effect. We have initiated the necessary assessment to complete a master national farm roads. This process will be completed by April 2020 and same will be subject to periodic updates. RADA has implemented a mechanism for capturing actual outputs based on contractual agreement. This information is to be summarized and documented for reference and tracking. Timeframes. Immediate action has been taken to have all the 2019-20 contracts captured in this manner. In order to improve contract management, RADA will implement a contract management system to enable improved continuous tracking of contracts in the next financial year. We propose to develop and implement a road management database of farm roads, specifying location and condition to provide some assurance that all identified farm roads are taken into account in the planning, budgeting, and rehabilitation process. The time frame for this is May 1st, 2020. Well, that is, I think, the main thrust of what? Well, there are two issues in this. Issue 3 really has an A and a B. One is a lack of a proper road management system, including in that a database of all the farm roads identified by location, condition, etc. And you've indicated here that by May 1st, 2020, you hope to have developed and implemented a road management database for that process. The other point that was made was the fact that you rather continually revised its budget for farm road rehabilitation, failed to document reasons for revisions, and often excluded or scoped out critical elements such as drainage after the commencement of contracts in order to stay within budget. And that is addressed in the report quite significantly. That seems to be a common practice where you would sign a contract and then in the course of the execution of the contract, important elements would be eliminated so that the contract would be completed within the contract sum, as if the actual arrival of the contract sum had failed to take into account these important elements, and so there was no funding in the contract to cover them. And those elements were typically things like drainage, culverts, etc. I'd love your response, Mr. Thompson, to that.
All right, let's deal with the last point. When a contract is issued, many of the instances when we do what is called de-scoping and they proclaim that drains or culverts have been removed, is when the contractor started the work, because these roads were in such a deplorable conditions for decades. The drains that existed then were all blocked, could not be identified. When the work started and the contractor realized that drains and culvert exist, they were pointed out to us and they cleaned them. So where those drains would have been cleared, it's not necessary to put drains in them. So we use the funds within the contract to extend so we could get 100 meters or so more of asphalted roads or surface. So it's not necessarily that we deliberately take out the drains and culvert. While the roads were being done, we found that drains existed. So we clear, open them up, and then use the monies that would have normally go towards those drains to extend the surface.
Thank you. Members, any comments on that, or can we move on?
The only thing I would say, given the challenge with scoping, the initial scoping, is I would suggest that some sort of contingency be provided in the contract so that, you know, the inevitable variations that come around can be dealt with without having to, for example, eliminate drainage, because oftentimes if you don't make provision for drainage, all the work you're doing on the road will soon be lost at first heavy rain.
Well, we have an example cited in the report of a road that was within 4 months, I think. The work was substantially had dissipated or damaged.
Which is not at all
but Mr.
surprising.
Thompson's point seems to almost be the reverse, which is that this is instances where monies were allocated in the contract to do the drainage, but in the course of executing the contract, it was discovered that there was in fact drainage infrastructure already in place. So they were able to, so to speak, to free up those drains and so on, and use those monies to extend the road perhaps a little further than was originally contemplated.
I would be very surprised if that's the typical situation. I know much more likely is the scenario that I suggested, where improper or inadequate scoping was done in the first place, probably because you couldn't even identify the road properly because of the bush and the overgrowth and all of that. So I'm not necessarily criticizing the scoping, but until you actually start going in, doing the bushing, doing a proper assessment of the condition of the road, you can't really tell exactly what is needed, the base, how, you know, the condition of the base, etc. But I have seen where, in real instances, where when these variations are recognized as needed, but there is insufficient money in the contract, a fixed sum available for the contract, they either reduce the length of the road, the amount of kilometers that can be done, or, you know, drop out some other element of in the contract. And invariably the drainage is one of those that goes, and they just do the road surface. It looks pretty for a while, but it doesn't stand up at all because, you know, especially farm roads, which are often in mountainous areas, you know, the scoring from the water very quickly, you know, destroys the road again.
And that was pointed out in the AG's report. There's a specific instance in the report of at least one case where the work was substantially destroyed within 4 months. AG, you want to make a point?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm going to make mention of the representations being made here before the Public Accounts Committee. I would say that in total, RADA would have provided 4 written responses and several verbal representations. At no time, at no point in time, did the CEO indicate that in these instances there were existing drainage systems. One of the concerns raised is the lack of information and justification surrounding the rescoping of the various projects. Mr. Chairman, I've heard several explanations provided that has not been included in the 2 responses. They've not been included in the response to the clerk to the committee. This then puts me in an awkward position because it means that whereas I would have said that there are certain matters that are resolved, they are not resolved because I do have to verify the information. And so I am asking that a written response be provided by RADA setting out what has been the representations made to the committee this morning along with the supporting evidence. Because as it stands, the reason why several draft reports are provided is to give the entity an opportunity to respond. I really do not want to waste the time of the committee. So I do not want to include information in a report that is easily disputed by the entity or for which I'm drawing a wrong conclusion. In this instance, I'm hearing several responses that has not been brought to my attention. And I'm scouring all the reports, including emails, and I'm not seeing any reference to any of what is being said. In fact, the response to the clerk suggested to me that the findings were accepted, with the exception of one relating to the segregation of duties, where RADA provided an explanation, which I believe is as a result of a misunderstanding of the points that we were making. But I also admit that I don't think we made the point properly enough, which probably contributed to that. But in every other instances, I received an acceptance of this. What I'm hearing from RADA now, I have cited in this report that in 53 instances, specification for drainage was either reduced or omitted. And what I am hearing is that in all these instances, it's because the drainage existed before.
Can I, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
What is presented in terms of the responses is an acceptance of the Auditor General's recommendation. The points, as you go through and questions are raised, I'm not certain that we should simply be sitting and saying that, as responded, we have accepted. There are occasions that you can give explanation for what would account for the action, but it doesn't mean that we are saying that the Auditor General report is not accepted. I mean,
yes, let me stop you there. So 53 instances of rescoping in which the scope of the contract was reduced so that it fell within the contract sum, and the items that were eliminated were typically around drainage. The explanation that Mr. Thompson has given for this is that largely it is because when they go in and start the work, they discover that there is drainage infrastructure there which does not need to be built from scratch, and therefore that money can be reallocated to extending the scope of the works in terms of how many kilometers is being done or whatever, and they don't need to spend it on putting in drainage. But that what the Auditor General is indicating is that explanation has not been proffered before. And in response to the report, this was a very critical issue in the report, this rescoping issue, because we know that when drainage is not dealt with, it undermines the integrity of the road and how long the road lasts, and therefore it goes to whether or not public resources are being properly employed. So to hear an explanation now, which does not accord with what has been provided to the Auditor General in the ample opportunities that have been presented for this to be explained, raises a concern, which is why she would like to see it actually put in writing as to what RADA is saying is the reason why the rescoping was so prevalent in the form of eliminating the expenditure on drainage systems.
Well, I will say, Mr. Chairman, that internally, that is also a concern, right? It's something that we have identified, so we are not at variance with the audit report. Mr. Thompson perhaps is not complete in answering the question to say that you have had occasion where, the rescoping would be as a result of discoveries as it relates to drains. But we are not saying that extensively. We're not using that one occasion or two occasions to blanket and decide that of the cases cited, that was the situation. That is not my interpretation of the response, because I'm saying that even internally, we have that concern too about the rescoping.
So, assuming then that the explanation was not attempting to explain even the majority of those circumstances, but was just pointing out that this has happened from time to time. In the ordinary case, in the ordinary case of these 53 situations in which the rescoping eliminated the actual drainage works, what is the reason why the decision was taken to eliminate the drainage works and have the contract completed within the original contracts, and why is that decision taken?
In some of the instances, we relied on the people who live in the area, and sometimes they are very, very, not to say that we request or require technical support from them, but they live in the area, more familiar with the situation, and they said they will tell the contractors and the engineers on site that, look, it is, while we believe that drain is very important to lead water away from the road, this is not the place to put it. And where the drain would have normally done, it's something like a basin in the road, so that you do the road, do that section extensively well, so that the water can run freely across. Now, we have to be mindful that sometimes where these things are, it can lead to destruction of farmers' property, so we have to be mindful of it. But in some instances, it's not necessarily a drain, but also a runoff, a basin in the road.
Mr. Chairman,
the fact is,
look, just a minute here. The issue is that if you have a road network and a road that's not regularly maintained, this scenario you gave, whereby during the process of implementing the project, you find culvert and drains that were covered up. It's a natural stuff. Yeah? Anywhere you have road and you don't maintain it, those drains are going to get covered. So discovering them at the time of rehabilitation, and you clean them. So I assume you use part of the funds to regularize that drain, and the rest to extend the road service you are doing. It's a regular stuff. The situation that Member Bonded made a recommendation to have a contingency included in these projects. What we need to know whether or not it will be taken on board, that in the future you have some contingencies that when you come upon this situation where things are needed, it can be implemented. So we need to know whether or not the suggestions from Member Bonte will be taken on board.
Well, it would be useful to know what your view is on the suggestion that there be an amount for contingencies to deal with situations which may be discovered after the work has started. But I'm still trying to understand the explanation. Member Warmington said it's quite common, but we've also heard from you that it's not the blanket situation, that it's not always a situation where the drainage was omitted because drainage works were discovered during the course of the contract. Sometimes it's just a decision is taken to not proceed, and I'm just trying to understand what is the basis upon which that decision would be made to not do the drainage works that were originally part of the contract.
Mr. Chairman, the decision going forward, because there is, like I said, there is a concern internally about the leaving out the drains and the frequency. I think somewhere along the line, based on the information that was mentioned, you know, local information and reevaluation, sometimes the exigency of getting more road repair, a decision is being taken in a kind of localized way, and that is not the correct way that it should be done. Meaning that if there's need for a rescoping, that must go through a proper process and further evaluation. And I think sometimes what is happening is that the exigency of executing and getting more of the road fixed, especially if it's bad, is being taken, and the matter of the drains, you know, appear to be getting a kind of secondary treatment. And so we have to evaluate, we have to stop and evaluate that process, and that's why the recommendation from the auditor is taken fully on board, in that the process of rescoping has to be one that is consistent with a level of examination and evaluation that, and approval that will determine that the drain, as scoped initially, is no longer relevant. It has to go through a robust process. But I believe on the ground, so just the exigency of executing and sometimes the information that come in, which is not sometimes tested and properly, you know, evaluated. And so we have to strengthen that process going forward.
I think you do, because it seems to be quite a prevalent process that the contract is signed, it includes drainage, then there's a decision to eliminate the drainage and keep the contract within the contract sum, so maybe you can do a few further yards of road.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, you're producing a road that don't last any time at all, and that money is just is wasted. Mr. Clark.
Mr. Chairman, correct me, anyone of the gentlemen at the table, if I'm wrong. But what I do know, I was told some time ago at a meeting, a parish meeting, that the works that are done on Farm Road are the lowest of the grade, which is they call it chip and spray. That is what they do at Farm Road. So they will at all time, because, Mr. Chairman, when you go out into the rural areas, the need for roadway is humongous. And therefore, it is really appeasing the situation of a farmer who is at the back end of a street, and I'll use Cottage Road again, who... But that's what I'm saying. We have to bring it forward, because I don't know if the Auditor General is aware that that is what really happened. It is the lowest of the grade.
Well, whatever, we accept that it is the least expensive form of road rehabilitation that's available, because you're not doing roads that are traversed by a lot of traffic, but they're important for farmers, so they need to be traversable. But if they're not done with a proper engineering approach, and you drop out critical elements like drainage, they're not going to last any period of time, or not going to last as long as they are expected, and the money ought to last. Can we move to issue 4? Issue 4, RADA's process of selecting contractors was not always transparent or competitive. Reviewed 112 road rehabilitation contracts valued at $1.6 billion, and noted that RADA used a local competitive bidding methodology for only 4 contracts valued at 19 years in the pool of contractors. A system is now in place where contractors are selected from the Contractor General website based on geographical location of the proposed farm road. In cases where there is an insufficient number of contractors within the parish, contractors will be engaged from nearby parishes. It should be noted, for example, that a total of 81 contractors are currently listed on the Contractor General list from road maintenance category, which is grades 1 to 4. During the 2019-20 period, RADA engaged all contractors listed except for St. Andrew, where 13 out of 14 contractors were invited to bid. So we hear the runs, but we note the absence of a competitive bidding process in the vast majority of cases. And we also note that it said that RADA was unable to indicate the basis on which contractors were pre-selected for invitation to bid on road rehabilitation contracts. And this is $1 billion worth of work we're talking about here. So,
all right, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Auditor.
All right, it gives an overall figure of the amount that went out to contract. And it says there, what, 129.8 million were given out using the limited tender methodology. It said despite the procurement guidelines not being met. I don't know what the AG mean by not being met. The procurement guidelines provides for any contract below 10 million for the limited tender methodology to be used, with inviting 3 qualified contractors. Any amount up to 20 million, it provides for invitation up to a minimum of 5 contractors rather, to tender on it. And the projects that are done by RADA are normally $6, $8, and $10 million contract. So it is used with, so RADA has not breached the procurement guideline. It might be 128 million, yes, But there are $6, $7, $8 million contract, $10 million contract that is provided for, and $2 million. The procurement guideline provides for direct contract with someone who only have you have your TRN. So if you have 128 million, 29.8 million, divided by, if you look around the back, you see a spreadsheet of this size of contracts. There are 5, 6, 8, $10 million, and up to $20 million. The procurement guideline provides for limited tender process. So what is the argument about? Nothing was done illegal or breaching any guideline in the procurement guideline here. Nothing at all, if it's within that range.
Well, Member Warmington, we've heard your opinion on the matter, but I want to hear the Auditor General's opinion on it. AG.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to direct you again to page 21 of 45 of the report, paragraph 2.9. Further, in 6 instances, RADA used the limited tender methodology to award contracts valuing $129.8 million, despite the procurement guidelines not being met. As each contract was above the applicable threshold of $20 million, and as such should have been procured using the LCB methodology in accordance with the guidelines. And if you look at the footnote number 19, Mr. Chairman, it says, as revised via Ministry of Finance and Planning Circular number 27, dated September 28, 2016, the procurement guidelines authorize the use of the limited tender methodology for contracts valued up to $20 million. Above this threshold, up to $150 million, local competitive bidding should be applied.
So the procurement guidelines were not complied with in this case for this 129.8 million. So could you explain for us why it is that these 6 contracts were issued without going through the local competitive bidding process, given that they were over 20 million each?
When you take a cursory look at the list of contractors at the back of the Auditor General report, pages 36 through to 38, one contractor would get a multiple of those under 20 million, can easily amount to over $200 million to one contractor. So when you use the limit for the limited tender, it doesn't tell you much. But when you look through the list of contracts that those same contractors get, you realize a different picture. And what we are seeing clearly here this morning, Chairman, is that the pronouncements by the representative from RADA is not supported by evidence that the Auditor General could corroborate.
Well, in this instance, the RADA hasn't made a pronouncement yet. It was Minister Warmington who made the pronouncement, inaccurately as it turned out. So we'd like to hear from RADA. So what we have is 6 contracts, each valued at over 20 million with no local competitive bidding. Yes, each of them. And then we have, as we see as well, in the listing in Appendix 5 of the actual contracts, we have multiple contracts going to the same contractor through the limited tender process, and aggregating to very large sums. I mean, if you look, for example, at contractor C in this instance, if you were to add up the contracts that they got, you know, only one of them is over 20, so only one of them is within that list of 6. But the others are all in the teens. Several of them are 19 point something million, in fact. 4 of them are 19 point something million. Many of them are, yes. So, I don't know who contractor C is, but please explain the approach to that was taken to the procurement.
Yeah, here. Chairman, when we send out the bids, they were under the threshold established, the estimates. When they come back, we realize that some were a little above the threshold. We accept what they...
Just a minute, explain a little more. When you send the documents out to tender,
Yes.
so you are saying the tender figure that came back from the contractors
Yes.
exceeded the engineering estimate that you had.
Yes.
And in cases like this, it was over 20 million.
Yes.
At that stage, the procurement guideline does not permit you to change what is there. You have to accept the tender that you take the lowest tender, no sir? Am I correct? The lowest responsible tender came back.
Yeah,
so in fact, when it went out to tender, it was not 20 million, now over 20 million. But they came back and said, it's a normal stuff. You invite to tender publicly, the contractor come back with a figure that that's workable. It's a 15 above or below, but the case will go up to 30%. You have no choice.
So,
that's the marketing out there.
So what we do is that we take the lowest of the lot that came back.
All right. You've been interrupted by Member Warmington. You were explaining what you were doing. Please just proceed to provide the explanation.
As I said, when the bids went out, they were under 20 million. But when they came back, when the documents came back, they were, slightly above. And what we do is that we take the lowest of the responses to the contract. It's something that we have acknowledged what the contractor general have said, and we are strengthening that in that department.
When you say it goes out at under 20 million, you mean there's an estimate, in-house estimate, that the contract should be below 20 million? Is that what you mean? Member Warmington, please. I'm asking you. When you say, when it went out, it was originally under 20 million, but what came back was above 20 million.
Yes.
So what went out at below 20 million was based on an in-house estimate of the cost of the works?
Engineering estimate.
An engineering estimate.
Chairman,
yeah.
I'm not understanding. Is the CEO saying that when the estimate done by the in-house engineer is below, say, for example, $20 million, and then fine. So if it comes above $20 million, it would then not be a situation of a direct contract. It would be a situation where you have a limited tender among the five, as Member Warmington is saying, and then it comes back above the engineering estimate, which, if the entity wants to do the contract, would look for the least amount and award that contract to that contractor. So if what the CEO is saying then, it would not amount to a direct contract. Isn't that so?
The CEO is saying, I believe, that he's explaining why the local competitive bidding rules were not complied with for these 6 contracts, each of which was above 20 million. Mm-hmm. And he's saying that at the time when they were sent out to the market to be bid on, the in-house engineering estimates for each of them was below 20 million. But they came back at above, and they just took the lowest bid, and that was that. So they never went through a local competitive bidding process. They just used the limited tender process, because at the time when the bidding was initiated, their in-house estimate had it that the contract was valid at less than 20. The work required would be at a cost of under 20.
Yes, I understand that, Chairman, but this goes into sharp contrast with what the Auditor General has in her report, because the AG's department has the contract of over $20 million as direct contracting in the procurement methodology.
The question wasn't addressed to direct, we're doing the limited part. We weren't addressing the direct part yet.
No.
When we talk about limited, so we're coming with direct, that's another question. The direct one doesn't relate to what I'm saying now.
Oh, that's what you are saying. What I am saying is that my concern relates to these that are over 20 that went direct.
that isn't the issue raised in this issue in the prompt.
Yes.
Yeah. This issue in the prompt was discussing the fact that there was $129.8 million worth of procurement for contracts over 20 million, which ought to have followed the local competitive bidding process and did not. And the explanation that's being provided is, as has already been outlined. I don't know if the Auditor General wants to comment on that.
But it can't be, Chairman. That explanation can't be.
He asked a different question, you know. He's asked a different question. He's asked about the direct contract. But the 129 is dealing with the limited tender. But he's asking another question outside of this one. He's dealing with the DC, not the LT. Am I correct?
Yes. I don't know if you have anything to say on this particular point, on this explanation.
Mr. Chairman, I'm beginning to sound like a broken record. I've not been advised of the explanation provided by Mr. Thompson here this morning. The finding as it is remains there was a breach unless Mr. Thompson can provide evidence to the contrary. It maintains. And Mr. Chairman, I need to make a point that I know that the heads of agencies oftentimes can provide an explanation which may appear reasonable. But it is my responsibility to point out when there are breaches. And even if I may think it's reasonable, I cannot take it on myself to accept it, because then I become complicit. And I will be called on to provide an explanation alongside the perpetrators of the act. So I'm just saying that generally, that my responsibility is to report the breach based on the standards set by the Ministry of Finance. I can include in the report the explanations provided, but I cannot dismiss a finding on the basis of experiences.
So could I just ask you, the explanation that has been proffered here, namely that in these instances for these 6 contracts, the reason why the local competitive bidding process was not followed was because they were originally quantified internally by the engineer as being under 20 million each, and that's why. Was that put forward as the explanation to you?
I'm not aware of that, Mr. Chairman, and certainly if that explanation was provided to us, we would have countered that to say that that's not an acceptable response. Mm-hmm. If you are to move from one method to another, you have to provide a justification for that, and that was not provided.
Mr. Yes. Chairman.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the board accepts that there has been a breach, and we agree, and this has been discussed with management at the 2 follow-up board meetings that we've had to address the Auditor General's report. The requirement is for the process to be revisited and retendered, right? So you rescope and you retender. So there is a breach, and management understands that going forward, that they cannot. Technically, once you exceed the limit in terms of the contract amount, and that is what the Auditor General is saying.
Just a minute. Let me just correct here from my position. I'm a practitioner. I'm a conservator by trade. I'm a construction manager by trade. And what you're saying now, so if the tender comes back over, you can retender if you so wish.
Yes.
But very rare you're going to get below that figure in the second one. The head of the department takes a decision with his technical officers if you go ahead with it. So it's not a breach. It is done in every single agency. And I'm in charge of National Works Agency, and this happened. You have UDC and all these with the big projects. No.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
you're saying that simply by, as long as when the responses come in, if they're over the threshold, you don't have to abort the process and start again. You can just proceed.
The procurement guidelines says if the amount is 15% above the engineer estimate or below 15% low, then you can proceed. Or you proceed if it's 15% above and below. That's what the guideline says.
That's the tolerance.
Huh?
That's the levels of tolerance.
Yes.
That would allow you to stay.
But there are cases where it is below 15, and based on the capacity of that contractor, the entity might take a chance. If it's above, that's a dicey little one right there. There are cases where they go with it still, but that's stretching it. But once 15 above or below, it's provided for in the procurement guideline printed by the Ministry of Finance. Yeah.
Anyway, Chairman, you were saying that the breaches were acknowledged and and I don't think you'd finished your point. Or had you finished the point did you finish the point you wanted to make?
Yes, we concur and we recognize that we'll strengthen the process going forward to avoid situations that.
All right. We move to issue.
I have one as a reference to that item. Look at the Auditor General reports at page 36. Item 36 on page 36. You have about 4 different areas were joined together for a total of $25 million, and then that was through direct contracting.
Yes, and in fact, the next item
so
in the
you
prompt.
Circumvent the limited tender.
1 second. The next item in the prompt is to do with direct contracting. So let us take it in a proper. Yeah. So I'll continue with the second aspect of issue 4. Which issue 4 has several elements to it. 2 more elements. RADA also utilized the direct procurement and emergency methodologies for 33 contracts valuing $520.93 million, although the allowable circumstances permitting the direct and emergency procurement methodologies were not met. For instance, in 25 of the 33 direct and emergency contracts valuing $401 million, which is 77% of the value, RADA's justification for use of this methodology did not conform with the procurement guidelines. Management response. We accept the Auditor General observations and we will conform to section 1.1.4 of the GOJ Revised Handbook of Public Sector Procurement Procedures, Volume 2, March 2014. Going forward, we accept the Auditor General observations and will proceed with the stated procurement guidelines in accordance with the Public Procurement Standard Billing Document Annex W3. Procurement of minor works for rehabilitation of farm roads. Request for quotation, RFQ, restricted bidding, which is dated April 2019. So they have accepted that they did not. Yeah.
And that is what is troubling, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Everywhere RADA say we accept the Auditor General's finding. That means that they have knowingly gone through these breaches. Now that they have been pointed out, and these have been done under the board supervision. When you have over $1 billion, look at the one I just pointed out. They joined 4 roads together, 4 projects together, and never go to tender for the $25 million. You use direct contracting rather than go to tender. Why?
Could I explain here, Chairman? Yes. You remember some time ago, I think it was in 2015 or thereabout, 2016, when we had the serious flood rains in the northern parishes of Portland, St. Mary, St. Anne, Trelawney. We had extensive damage to road infrastructure, road network, farm roads, etc. And communities were severely marooned. And we had to apply the emergency contracting method to restore the connections in those communities as quick as possible because farmers were cut off and all sorts of things. So it was during that period we applied that. And we could not wait to really use other method of contracting to restore normality in those areas.
Well, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, that doesn't speak to the point I raised. There are what Mr. Thompson said, you have 4 different areas, cover at least 2 parishes I heard you mention.
No. Portland, St. Mary, St. Anne, Trelawney.
Yes, 4 parishes, and you put them all together and engage one person to do them.
Question is, were these
It's in the report.
contracts in different parishes?
Yes.
In all these parishes? So the question, they were done at direct contract. That's the concern of member Jackson. If they were in all these parishes done as direct contract, you mentioned the flood we had then. The question I'd like to know, and the question that you need to answer, was this an emergency? Because only in emergency situation are you permitted to do direct contract at this volume. So you're saying because of the flood and all of those stuff, you were forced to do a direct contract?
Yes.
Did you provide this information to the Auditor General?
Well, clearly not, because what the Auditor General has said here in response to this is that RADA's justification for the use of these methodologies did not conform with the procurement guidelines. So the Auditor General was not satisfied that you had made the case for using direct contracting.
Mr. Thompson keep on saying yes, 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 we do, and the Auditor General cannot point to any proof of it. That's what RADA keeps doing, make these verbal pronouncements at will with no evidence to support it. And that is taxpayers' money, over $1 billion.
Member Jackson. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
Chairman. We all remember that massive flood rains in the northern parishes. Farmers were marooned, they were cut off, communities were cut off.
But Mr. Thompson,
we have evidence to support that.
Mr. Thompson, one is not disputing that there is a role for emergency procurement. There is a role because emergencies arise. And the government needs to respond to them on a timely basis. And normal procurement procedures don't allow that. So that is the circumstance in which direct contracting is permissible. But it's for the agency that is going that route to document and substantiate that it was that reason was valid and relevant in that instance. And what the Auditor General is saying is that you haven't done so. So there's no way of knowing that it was done on a legitimate basis or on an illegitimate basis. That is the problem.
And Mr. Chairman, that is why you will see that the Auditor General's recommendation is accepted. But within the context of appearing here and saying what accounted for the action, we're not trying to justify, are trying to say what is being presented is what attended to the action, and still acknowledge that going forward, the recommendations will have to be adhered to, even under those when the circumstances are right. That is what is being presented. Yes.
The procurement guidelines accommodate a situation where there has been flooding and there's an urgent need to respond to it through direct contracting. And what Mr. Thompson is saying is that it is because of the urgency of the situation why he went the direct contracting route. But the Auditor General is saying the guideline was breached because there's been nothing brought to our attention evidentially to support that is what was the situation. So what we have is RADA saying this is why we did it, but there's nothing to support that that's actually why they did it, other than saying it after the event to justify a breach of the guidelines. And that is why the committee is uncomfortable with the response on this issue.
Mr. Chairman, may I say also?
There is no documentation.
Mr. Jackson mentioned that they are saying yes, yes. But so we accept the Auditor General's recommendation of observation. I'm taking it that they have realized that there were weaknesses in the operation and management, and the Auditor General having brought it to their attention. Going forward, those weaknesses will be strengthened, and the situation that existed before will not exist coming forward. That's my. Is it Mr. Pearson, Mr. Executive Officer? I'm saying that Member Jacks mentioned there. Mr. Thompson, if you not listen, you can answer.
Okay.
He's saying that each one is we accept. And I'm saying my observation here is that saying you accept is that you accept the fact that there are weaknesses in management and operation previously. This audit having been done, your performance audit have been done, report laid. Based on what is written there, you recognize and accept the fact that there are weaknesses. And going forward, my interpretation that you intend to be guided by these recommendations.
Mr. Warmington.
Well, let me finish.
You're leading the witness.
No,
you're suggesting to him what he ought to say
I am giving my explanation.
to lead to a satisfactory and uncontroversial result.
I am dealing my interpretation.
And you're doing so in the most blatant manner.
No, I am dealing with my interpretation. You have to say yes or no. So you're saying based on that, going forward, you will be brought back before this committee because of these weaknesses. Is that why you're saying so you accept these or accept?
All you have to do is
nod your head
and say
that
yes.
you accept. Yes. So you won't be brought back here for it.
No. Chairman.
You correct them.
Chairman.
No.
Members. Dr. Guy.
Thank you, Chairman.
Unsalvageable.
CEO, do you have a procurement officer?
Yes.
Is the procurement officer here?
No, he's not here.
He's not
today.
here. Since these breaches have been recognized and you have indicated that, and as I put it as eloquently as Member Warmington, going forward, these breaches will no longer be entertained nor are done. Has there been any addition to your procurement unit? Have you sent that procurement officer on further training? Because it would just cool a man. Have you also, thank you, you're doing Warmington's work. Have you also recognized that there's deficiencies in his appreciation of what the procurement rules are, and what measures have you taken to ensure that going forward we will never have to bring you back to the PAC to answer questions just like these? Because as Member Warmington and as his sidekick is saying in the front row, that you will...
Warmington said doesn't reach that level yet.
You will... Right, apprentice sidekick. You will come back to the committee if you are brought back here to indicate that all that has been done, and no longer will the PAC see that you have breached procurement guidelines.
In other words, what steps have you taken in practical terms to address this procurement deficiency? You don't have the procurement officer here, I don't know why. But there have been breaches that have been pointed out, and we've heard that you're going to do better in the future. But what are you actually implementing to ensure that that is the case?
Well, Chairman, the Ministry of Finance have approved a new procurement unit for RADA with a staff complement of probably about 7 or so persons. So we are now populating that department to deal with the volume of works and contracts that we are now getting from the ministry. So that department, as we speak, is currently being strengthened. And we will also be getting new persons from outside to assist with populating that department.
What is the total, what's the total staff of RADA that is primarily dealing with farm road business, farm road matters, island-wide? What would be the total?
It's rather difficult to answer that now, but we have 5 engineers We have 1.5 procurement person, and that is why we are strengthening now. Yes, 1.5 procurement.
And you're going to 7, did you say? You're going to 7
So in addition to that, we will, and of course the parish managers and the parish managers and the deputies all on board to assist with the program. But in terms of the procurement, that is where the bulk of the work is passing through, and that is why we have to take a concerted effort to strengthen that department. So I think going forward you will see better results.
Well,
coming
if you have
out of
7 people, you say going in that department,
No.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. All right, issue 4.
Mr. Chairman,
I was hoping.
Going forward.
Jackson,
just as we
could
go
I
on.
ask you to just hold that question? I'm
No.
sure it will be relevant to the last issue we're going to do, which is let's wrap up issue 4 today, because we're nearing the end of this sitting. So I just want to at least complete issue 4. So this is the third aspect of issue 4. Tender evaluation reports for 112 contracts examined reveal no evidence that RADA assessed bidders to determine whether they met minimum qualifying criteria in compliance with the guideline. We noted that RADA's due diligence process related to the selection of contractors was limited to the validity of their TCC and the National Contracts Commission registration, and selection based on the lowest bid. RADA did not provide any evidence that it conducted a pre-qualification exercise of potential bidders for limited tender contracts in accordance with Section A7.3 of the Invitation to Bidders, which requires RADA to evaluate bids to determine compliance with regulations and includes assessment of experience of similar works, qualification and expertise of key management and technical personnel. Management's response. RADA has implemented the following. Effective September 2019, in addition to Public Procurement Committee and Tax Compliance Certificate, RADA added 2 compulsory pre-requirements for selection of contractors. 1, evidence of financial and technical capability to perform the contract, that is, audited financial statements or a letter from a bank clearly outlining financial resources to successfully undertake the contract. And 2, work history, evidence as a contractor in the construction of at least one work of the nature and complexity equivalent to the work to be completed over the last 3 years. 1 and 2 were not required previously.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Member.
I don't know where RADA is going with these answers here to this particular question. It says here RADA did not provide any evidence it conducted a pre-qualification exercise of potential bidders for limited tender contracts. The CEO said earlier on that they are guided by the list from the Contract Commission, National Contracts Commission. On all of these investigation and pre-qualifications are already done by the National Contracts Commission. So how does one expect RADA to provide pre-qualification? They're on the list, qualified by the National Contracts Commission, and that is the pre-qualification that is necessary. The question I must ask, Mr. Chairman, through you to the CEO, the contractors that you use, are they registered on the National Contracts Commission?
We pick contractors from the NCC
Is yes or
website.
no?
Yes.
Right. So if you get them from the National Contracts Commission, they are already pre-qualified. You don't need them something about what you have here. So your answer here is that they are drawn from the list of pre-qualified contractors by the National Contract Commission, because that is the entity. That is the entity and agency, Mr. Thompson. Just a minute, let me finish. That's the entity and agency established to review and qualify contractors. And if they do that, what more pre-qualification we need?
If you're looking at the prompt, it says that special efforts were made during 2018-19 to widen the pool of contractors. A system is now in place where contracts are selected from the Contractor General website, etc., and then they go to say that a total of 81 contractors are currently listed on the contractor general list, and so on. During the 2019-20 period, RADA engaged all contractors listed except one in St. Andrew. The question is whether that was, I don't know if that was always the case. Yeah. I mean, where you get them from? There may be a local person, a local contractor.
No. We pick contractors from the National Contracts Commission website. And as soon, what I must tell you, as soon as their TCC or NCC license expire, they take them down.
And that has always been the approach taken.
Yes.
So, could I just ask you, AG, where the relevant procurement guidelines require the agency to assess the competence or eligibility of potential bidders based on qualifications, expertise of key management, and experience of similar works. Do you accept the position that if they're only using contractors who are already registered with the NCC, they effectively outsource that analysis to the NCC and they don't need to do that themselves? Do you accept that argument?
My understanding is that the NCC would undertake that as a part of their due diligence process. So it is, I would say, time stamped. It is at that point in time when the NCC is conducting that assessment. However, once the contract exceeds a stated threshold, which I don't want to quote right now, which the specific amount, the entity as a part of that process must obtain that information to determine the current status of the contractors.
Chairman, this is the case where a contract now requires the approval of the NCC. And at this stage, a contract over $30 million is required to be submitted to NCC, and a contract over $60 million goes to Cabinet. None of the contracts done by RADA required, because they're all under the $30 million that has to go to NCC. And if they have $30 million, they cannot have that contract signed unless the NCC review and approves it. So the threshold is 30 and above. 30 and above have to go to NCC for the approval, and 60 and above have to go to Cabinet.
Member Warmington, can you yield a little? When were those revisions made? Can you tell us the date that those revisions were made? The 30 and the 60. Because my recollection is that up to a particular point in time, there were 20 and 40.
June 2016, and it was laid here.
Okay, 2016.
And Minister of Finance went through, they went and retreat on several stuff that Mrs. Mirage was in charge of procurement, and it came here.
Chairman, the Minister of Finance is here, so any shortcomings in terms of memory that the AG may have, the Minister of Finance officials are here, could give us some idea as to what they are, and I would invite you to ask the DFS to come in on this particular matter.
On the issue of whether the thresholds are 30 and 60, no. On what issue? On the issue as to whether the agency can rely on the NCC registration and not have to do their own assessment as to the competence of the potential bidders to adequately respond to the contract.
Okay.
Do you have any view on
Chairman,
that? Yes,
right.
Ms. Blade.
In terms of the procurement guidelines that existed at the time, it talks about 150 million. Once you're over 150 million, then you do a pre-qualification, which includes the financial assessment. Regarding the registration of by the NCC. Yes, the NCC looks at the financials when they are registering someone. But I'd say that the entity still needs to do some due diligence, need to satisfy themselves that at that particular point that they are issuing a contract, that the bidder will be able to carry out the works. But for the lower contracts, I would say that there is probably reliance on what the National Contracts Commission would have done.
Yes, madam.
So further to that, Section A7.3 of the invitation to bidders produced by RADA sets out that RADA requires bids to determine compliance with regulations and includes assessments of experience in similar works, qualification and expertise of key management and technical personnel.
So RADA's own tender documents.
And in fact, that is what we refer to in the document, the requirement under the invitation to bidders.
Are these contractors you use work with you regularly?
Yes.
So in work with you regularly, you'll know the performance and capability of the finance. No, sir?
Yes.
Yes, well, I think the Auditor General is auditing the documents that are before her. And the documents show that RADA's own documents suggest that they ought to be satisfying themselves of these issues.
Yeah.
So perhaps you need to look at your documentation that you're using if it is not fit for purpose or if it is not consistent with what you actually do.
Yes.
Because the Auditor General her role is to ensure that you are in fact complying with your own requirements and rules and the rules and requirements of the law of the land. Yeah.
Chairman,
yes.
If you read what the AG said, is that they didn't, but they did not provide any evidence. And that's all that the department is asking for. So if RADA, as Member Warmington is suggesting and leading the witness, as you have said, that they have an idea as to those contractors who have worked for them before, then provide that evidence to the AG. That's all that the department is asking, and this is what the report is saying. RADA did not provide any evidence that it conducted XYZ.
Point taken. So in the future, you can ensure that that if you provide whatever evidence you're relying on, whether it be NCC registration for smaller contracts, whether it be past performance of those contractors for work that you've done, and so on. Members, it's nearly 1 o'clock. We move now to any other business. In terms of the date of the next meeting and what we will be doing, we haven't finished this yet. So but we don't have a lot more to do on this. We come back in a fortnight and we finish this, and then we could perhaps move to another item. We have available to us, there is the Auditor General's 2018-19, is that? 17-18? 17-18 annual report for the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. So we could deal with that, unless members have any objection. So moved? Sorry, Member Jackson, you wanted to say something? What we're saying is that we'll reconvene in a fortnight at the usual time, where we will finish this report and we'll move on to the Local Government and Community Development annual report.
I just inquire, pardon me, I came in a little late. The CMU report, is that complete and tabled?
Not tabled yet, as I understand it.
Okay, the AG. The report is complete and it's in Parliament. So quite likely this afternoon the clerk will table it.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't know, but yeah, that could happen.
I couldn't imagine any reason why it would not.
Yeah.
Because the AG has already submitted it.
Yes. So, but since
I'm just inquiring. Are you afraid of what might be in the report?
Anyway, we will deal with this next time round. Someone care to move for the adjournment? Thank you. Moved and seconded. Thank you very much, everybody.
Water.
Give me tea.